Orson Blake hadn't planned on stopping at the park that afternoon, but when his 5-year-old son, Wyatt, pointed excitedly at the duck pond, he didn't have the heart to say no. "Just 10 minutes, bud," Orson said, jostling the paper bag of groceries in one arm and his son's small backpack in the other. His sneakers were soaked from the slush of an early March thaw, and his flannel jacket had seen better days. Wyatt released his hand and ran toward the pond's edge, squealing at the waddling ducks. Orson followed slowly, exhaustion clinging to every step. Life had been a daily hustle since Wyatt's mom walked out 2 years ago. Between working overnight shifts at the mechanic shop and taking care of his son, Orson barely had time to breathe. He lowered himself onto a bench, grocery bag crinkling beside him, eyes on Wyatt. That's when he heard a soft sniffle from the opposite end of the bench. He turned. A woman sat curled at the corner, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses, a silk scarf clutched in one hand. Her other hand trembled as she wiped at her cheek. Orson reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled travel pack of tissues. "Here," he said, offering them to her gently. "Looks like you could use one more than me." The woman startled slightly, then glanced at him through her glasses. Her lips parted, and for a second she looked like she might refuse. But then she took the tissues. "Thanks," she said quietly. Her voice was low, slightly hoarse. "Sorry, no need to be," Orson replied simply. "It's a park bench, sad people allowed." She gave a tired chuckle and turned slightly toward him. "It's a terrible day." "Yeah," he said, watching Wyatt, "but not for ducks, apparently." That made her smile faintly. "I'm Sienna." "Sienna James," Orson nodded. "Orson, that's my little guy, Wyatt." Sienna looked over and watched Wyatt tossing crumbs toward the ducks with intense focus. "He's cute." "Thanks, he's the boss." "I just carry the snacks." She laughed again, this time a little more freely, and pushed her sunglasses up into her hair. Her eyes were red, but striking deep hazel framed by long lashes. Her lipstick had faded, but she still looked like she belonged in a magazine ad. Orson didn't recognize her, but something about her posture, her elegance even in her sadness stood out. "You okay?" he asked gently. Sienna hesitated, then shrugged. "Rough morning, lost someone." "I'm sorry," Orson said, pausing. "I know the feeling." She looked at him, something softening in her eyes. "Yeah, my dad passed last year. Then my ex decided single parenthood wasn't for her. So here we are." He gestured between himself and Wyatt. "That's a lot," she said. He just nodded and offered a small smile. "You don't have to talk about it, but you can if you want." Sienna blinked, clearly caught off guard by the kindness. "It was my uncle. He raised me. He was the only family I really had." Orson's hand tightened around the bench. "That's tough. You got anyone with you?" She shook her head. "Just needed air. Couldn't stand the house anymore." Orson glanced at his son. "Want to grab a coffee? There's a little place across the street. I can get Wyatt a hot chocolate." Sienna hesitated. "I shouldn't, not a date," he said quickly. "Just two strangers who had a crappy day." That made her smile again. "All right, coffee sounds okay." The cafe smelled like cinnamon and espresso. Wyatt perched on a stool beside Orson, sipping his hot chocolate with whipped cream all over his nose. Sienna sat across from them, fingers laced around a cappuccino cup. She looked more relaxed now, her scarf loosened, her hair falling over one shoulder. She watched Wyatt with a soft gaze, the tension in her shoulders slowly easing. "You're good with him," she said. Orson shrugged. "I try. Most days I'm just winging it. He seems happy." "Yeah, he's all that matters." Sienna looked down at her coffee. "I admire that." They talked for another half hour, about nothing and everything. She asked about his job, and he joked about fixing cars with duct tape and hope. She didn't mention what she did, and he didn't ask. But when she laughed at one of Wyatt's silly dinosaur impressions, Orson felt something shift, something warm. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Outside, snow had started to fall again. Orson zipped Wyatt's coat and hoisted the grocery bag back under his arm. Sienna stood beside him, looking unsure. "Thank you for the tissues and the coffee." "Anytime," Orson said. "I mean it. You didn't have to be kind." He looked at her then, really looked. "Neither did you. But you smiled at my kid like he mattered. That means a lot." Sienna blinked, caught off guard again. Her eyes fluttered down. I'd really like to see you again." Orson paused, surprised. "Yeah," she nodded. "If that's okay," he smiled slowly. "I'd like that." She glanced at her watch. I have to go, but do you come to this park often? Every week. Saturdays if I can. I'll be here, she said, voice quiet. Next Saturday. And before he could say anything else, she gently touched his arm and turned, walking toward a sleek black car waiting at the curb. Orson blinked. A driver stepped out to hold the door open. She slipped inside and the car glided away. Wyatt tugged on his hand. Dad, was that lady sad? Yeah, buddy, Orson murmured. But not the whole time. He stared down the street where the car disappeared, still trying to wrap his head around what just happened. He had no idea who she really was, and definitely no idea that a millionaire had just fallen for the poor dad who offered her a tissue. Orson didn't see her again the following Saturday. He waited with Wyatt near the same bench, their usual bag of stale bread crusts in hand, but Sienna never came. Wyatt ran circles around the pond, gleeful as usual, but Orson's eyes scanned every car that passed, every woman walking alone. Still, nothing. By the third Saturday, he stopped expecting her. But on the fourth, in the midst of early April sunshine and scattered cherry blossoms, she returned. She wasn't dressed like before. No scarf, no sunglasses. Just a navy coat cinched at the waist, her hair pulled into a high twist. She looked more in control, composed, but her eyes still searched the park like she was hoping something was right where she left it. Orson was tying Wyatt's shoe when she spotted them. She walked over slowly, cautiously, as if she wasn't sure she'd be welcome. You came back, he said, standing. I didn't mean to disappear. I had to leave the city for a bit. He nodded once, keeping his expression unreadable. Wasn't sure you remembered this place. I remembered, she said quietly. I just wasn't sure if I deserved to come back. Wyatt looked up at her. You're the lady who cried, he said with matter-of-fact cheer. Sienna gave him a soft, surprised smile. I was, but I'm better now. Good, Wyatt said simply, then ran off to chase ducks again. Orson gestured to the bench. You want to sit? They both did, a careful foot of space between them. I kept thinking about that day, she said suddenly. I was falling apart and you were just kind, no questions, no judgment. I figured you'd had enough of both. She looked down at her hands. I'm not used to people doing things without wanting something. Orson tilted his head. You think kindness always comes with a price tag in my world, she said. It usually does. He studied her for a moment. What kind of world is that? She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was quieter. The kind that doesn't allow crying in public parks. Orson leaned back against the bench. Sounds exhausting. It is. They sat in silence for a bit. Birds chirped overhead and Wyatt shouted something about a duck army. Sienna laughed softly. I needed this, she said. More than I realized. If you ever need to disappear again, Orson said, you don't have to wait 4 weeks. She turned to him. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why were you so calm about me vanishing? He shrugged. People leave. I've learned not to hold my breath. Her face twisted slightly, almost like she'd been stung. That's a hard way to live. It's an honest one. She nodded slowly, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small paper bag. I brought something. He raised an eyebrow. For Wyatt, she added quickly. Nothing weird. She handed it to him and he peeked inside, a handful of dinosaur-shaped cookies, each one intricately iced and detailed. He looked up. You made these? No, but I bought them from a place that bakes custom orders. I remembered he liked dinosaurs. Orson smiled despite himself. He's going to go nuts. I was hoping he would. Wyatt came running over just as Orson handed him the bag. The boy's eyes went wide. Dino cookies, he gasped. Can I eat them all right now? Maybe not all, Orson said, laughing. But pick your favorite. Sienna watched him with a strange look, like she wasn't sure whether to feel proud or guilty. I don't usually get things right, she said under her breath. You did today. She looked at him, and for a moment neither of them said anything. The air between them shifted again, something unspoken but carrying weight. Sienna checked her watch. I need to get to a meeting, but I'd like to take you both to lunch next weekend, if you're free. Orson hesitated. You don't have to buy us lunch, I know. She paused. I want to. He looked at her closely. You're not trying to repay me for tissues, are you? No, she said slowly. I'm trying to learn how to give without expecting anything back. Orson nodded once. All right, lunch, she smiled. Saturday, we'll be here. She stood, brushing invisible lint from her coat. Bye, Wyatt. Bye, Cookie Lady, she laughed and walked off toward the street. This time, the car waiting for her was sleeker, glossier. Definitely not a cab. Orson watched the driver open the door for her. She said something to him, and he nodded respectfully before closing it behind her. Wyatt tugged on his sleeve. Dad, how come she gets a driver? Orson looked down at him. Some people live different lives, buddy. Wyatt munched a cookie thoughtfully. I like her. Yeah, Orson said softly. Me too. He wasn't sure what he was getting into, but something told him whatever her world was, she wasn't trying to hide it forever. The restaurant Sienna chose was nestled above a marina, white tablecloths fluttering on the terrace, the smell of salt water drifting in from the docks below. Orson hadn't known places like this offered grilled cheese on the kids' menu, but the hostess hadn't even blinked when Sienna made the reservation. He adjusted the collar of his button-down shirt, borrowed from his neighbor, and glanced at Wyatt, who was coloring on a paper placemat with the concentration of a scientist. Sienna sat across from them, sunlight catching on the delicate gold chain at her neck, her expression more peaceful than he'd seen before. You okay? She asked, setting down her glass of sparkling water. I'm still waiting for someone to tell me I'm underdressed and escort me out, he replied. Sienna leaned slightly forward. You're not, and nobody's going to. I just don't usually eat lunch where the forks outnumber the people, she laughed softly but didn't brush it off. I didn't bring you here to impress you. What did you bring us here for? Sienna rested her hands on the table. Because I like being around you, both of you. He studied her face, trying to read between the lines. You're not used to saying that out loud, are you? She shook her head. I'm used to being strategic, calculated. Sounds exhausting. It is. But then again, I don't usually sit on benches with strangers who offer me tissues. Orson glanced at Wyatt. You keep saying both of us. You know it's a package deal, right? I wouldn't want it any other way. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, so what do you actually do, Sienna? She hesitated, then looked down at the white napkin on her lap. I run a venture firm. I invest in companies, mostly tech and clean energy. He gave a low whistle. That's a whole different universe. I know, that's why I didn't bring it up before. He leaned back in his chair. Because you thought I'd Google you? No, she said, meeting his eyes. Because I didn't want it to matter, he nodded slowly. But it does. I want it to matter less. Wyatt looked up. Dad, can I have dessert? Orson smiled at him. You haven't even touched your sandwich. I'm full of sandwich, but not full of dessert. Sienna grinned. What if we take dessert to go and walk the docks instead? Wyatt's eyes lit up. Can we see boats? Absolutely, she said. Maybe even feed some seagulls. As they walked along the marina, the wind teasing Sienna's hair loose from its clip, Orson kept a step behind, watching her and Wyatt walk ahead, laughing at a pelican perched like a statue on the railing. You're good with him, he said once they paused by a boat named Marigold's Wish. I like kids, she replied. They don't pretend. He leaned on the railing beside her. That's rare where you're from. In my world, pretending is survival. You ever get tired of surviving? All the time, she looked at him. But lately I've been wondering what it would feel like to just live. Orson nodded. Living's messier. But it's real. She turned toward him, eyes thoughtful. You've had to do a lot of that, haven't you? I didn't have much choice. I envy that. He raised an eyebrow. You envy me. I envy how grounded you are, how sure you seem. I'm not sure of anything, except Wyatt. And maybe the fact that I really like talking to you. Her lips curved, but this time the smile reached her eyes. I'm glad, because there's something I've been meaning to ask. He waited. I'm hosting a fundraiser next weekend. Formal, black tie, the whole cliché. It's for a children's literacy nonprofit I help run. Would you come? With me? He stared at her, caught off guard. You want me to wear a tux? You'd look good in one, she said, almost shy. He rubbed the back of his neck. I haven't worn a suit since my cousin's wedding. And that was 10 years ago. I'll take care of it, she added quickly. I'll have someone bring a suit to your place. You don't have to worry about anything. He paused. And Wyatt, my assistant's niece, babysits. She's amazing. She can come meet you both first if you want. Orson looked out at the water, thinking, You sure you want to bring someone like me into your world? I'm not trying to bring you into it, she said. I want to meet somewhere in the middle. He turned back to her. Okay. We'll come. The look on her face was soft, almost relieved. Thank you. But I'm warning you now, I don't know which fork is which. I'll teach you, she said, straightening. It's the least I can do. They walked back slowly, Wyatt skipping ahead toward the parking lot. As they reached Sienna's car, Orson caught her hand before she opened the door. Why me? He asked quietly. She looked up at him, the air between them suddenly heavier. Because when everything felt hollow, you made me feel human again, she said. And I haven't felt that in a long time. He nodded once, her hand still in his. See you at the fundraiser then. She leaned up and pressed a kiss to his cheek. I'm looking forward to it. And then she was gone, the sleek car disappearing into traffic. Orson stood there for a long time, the faint warmth of her lips still lingering on his skin, wondering what he'd just agreed to and why, for the first time in years, it didn't scare him. The black car pulled up outside Orson's apartment, building right on time, its polished surface gleaming under the streetlights. He stood on the curb in a tailored navy tuxedo that fit like it was stitched from muscle memory. The sleeves hugged his arms just right, the lapels sat crisp against a white shirt, and the shoes' shiny leather with a silent tread felt like they belonged to another version of him. Wyatt was already tucked in upstairs, fast asleep beneath a blanket covered in hand-drawn dinosaurs. The babysitter Jules, a soft-spoken college student Sienna had introduced earlier that week, had settled on the couch with a stack of kids' books and a bowl of popcorn. She'd passed Orson's careful interrogation with grace and patience. The rear door opened, and Sienna stepped out. Orson's breath caught not because she looked expensive, though the midnight blue gown clinging to her frame probably cost more than his rent for 3 months, but because she looked unguarded. The Sienna who'd cried on a bench was still there, but tonight she looked like she'd opened a window and let herself breathe. You clean up all right, she said, her voice light but her eyes lingering. He took her hand as she approached. Not too bad yourself. The car pulled away, leaving behind the quiet hum of the city. As they walked toward the event hall, Orson glanced at her. You sure you're ready for this? Her grip on his hand tightened slightly. I've never been more sure of anything. Inside, the ballroom glittered. Chandeliers floated above like frozen fireworks, and every guest looked like they'd stepped out of a high society magazine. Orson's shoulders tensed instinctively, but Sienna didn't let go of his hand. A man in a velvet dinner jacket approached with a practiced smile. Sienna. You're late. I'm not late, she replied calmly. You're early. His eyes flicked to Orson, and this would be. Orson extended his hand before the man could dismiss him with a glance. Orson Blake. The man hesitated, then shook it. Julian March. I run the foundations board. Sienna's tone cooled. Julian, would you excuse us? He gave a short nod and moved on. Orson leaned close. You didn't tell me there'd be politics. There always are, she said. But tonight I don't care about playing. They moved through the crowd. Sienna introduced him only when necessary, never elaborating beyond his name. She didn't present him like a curiosity or a project. She stood beside him like he belonged there. Later, after speeches and a silent auction, a string quartet began to play. Sienna turned to him. Dance with me, he hesitated. I haven't done that since high school. Good, she said, offering her hand. Neither have I. He followed her to the floor. She guided his hand to her waist and they began to sway. The world around them softened to muted golds and quiet conversation. You're not what they expect, she said, her head resting against his shoulder. No offense, but I'm not trying to meet their expectations. I'm glad you're not. He looked down at her. What happens after tonight? She didn't flinch. Depends. What do you want to happen? I want to keep seeing you, not just in sparkly rooms, in real ones, with Wyatt, with takeout and cartoons. Her breath caught just slightly. I want that too. He tightened his hold just a little. Then we figure it out. She leaned back to look at him. You're not afraid I'll change my mind. You already had the chance to disappear. You didn't. They danced until the music faded, until the room began to thin. Outside, the air was cool and quiet again. Her driver pulled up. She looked at Orson, eyes full of something raw and honest. Come with me, he blinked. Now, yes, I can't leave Wyatt. You won't. I meant tomorrow or the next day. I want you both to come, to stay. I have a guest house separate, comfortable. Just come be in my life. He looked at her, at the vulnerability behind her words. This isn't a fairy tale, Sienna. No, it's better, because it's real, he nodded once. Let me talk to Wyatt. If he's good with it, we'll come. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she kissed him slow, certain. I'll see you soon. The car pulled away and Orson stood there, tuxedo jacket open, tie loose, heart racing. 3 days later, Sienna opened the door to her estate and found Wyatt barreling into her arms with a backpack stuffed with action figures. Orson followed, his hand resting on a duffel bag, eyes taking in the sprawling property. No turning back now, she teased. He smiled. Wouldn't want to. She reached for his hand as Wyatt dashed toward the garden. You really meant it, Orson said, glancing around the house. I meant all of it. They stood in the doorway of a life neither of them had expected, one built not on convenience or fantasy, but on messy, beautiful reality. On one moment of kindness that had changed everything, and this time, neither of them walked away. The guest house was tucked behind tall hedges and a winding stone path, private enough that Orson could forget the main house existed when he wanted to. It had 2 bedrooms, a small open kitchen, and a back patio where Wyatt had already claimed a corner with a pile of plastic dinosaurs. Sienna had given them space, true to her word. She hadn't hovered or tried to mold their lives into hers. Instead, she'd shown up each morning with fresh fruit and coffee, barefoot and smiling as if she belonged there. And somehow she did. That morning, Orson stood in the kitchen, pouring pancake batter onto a griddle, while Wyatt crouched beneath the table, whispering dinosaur strategy to himself. The sliding door creaked, and Sienna stepped in, holding a folded newspaper and wearing an oversized sweater that probably wasn't hers originally. You made pancakes, she said, leaning against the counter. I make them every Sunday, he replied, flipping one. It's the law. Think I could earn one. He slid a plate her way without looking up. Jury's still out. She took a bite, eyes closing. Okay, I'll plead my case. I'm listening. I've got a proposal, she said, setting the newspaper on the counter. Nothing corporate. Orson raised an eyebrow. There's a cottage on the north side of the property, she continued. It's old, hasn't been touched in years, but it has a garden, enough space, and it's far enough away that you wouldn't feel like I'm hovering. He set the spatula down. You're offering us a house. I'm offering you a home, she said. One that's yours, no strings, no conditions, just a place you can make your own if you want. He watched her for a long moment. Why are you doing this? Because I want you to stay. Because I want a life with you that isn't about guest houses and borrowed time. She folded her arms, but her voice stayed soft. And because Wyatt deserves a backyard, Orson exhaled. You really mean that? I've never offered anyone a garden in a house before. So yes. He looked at her and then at Wyatt, who had climbed onto the couch with a tea, Rex clutched in each hand. What if I say yes? Orson asked. Then I'll have the keys delivered tonight. He crossed the room and stood in front of her. You're serious about this? About us? I am. He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Then let's stop pretending we're still figuring it out. She looked up at him. What do you mean? I mean I love you. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. Say that again. I love you, Sienna James. I love the woman who cried on a park bench. I love the one who bakes dinosaur cookies she doesn't even eat. And I love the one who just offered me and my son a future. Her eyes glistened. I love you too. He leaned in and kissed her, steady and certain. She melted into him like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. When they pulled apart, she whispered, So breakfast every Sunday. Every Sunday, he promised. With extra syrup if you're lucky. Later that week, the cottage was cleaned out, repainted, and furnished with a mix of Orson's modest belongings, and a few touches Sienna had added without asking: an old oak bookshelf, a porch swing, a rug with dinosaurs' hands stitched into the border. Wyatt had a bedroom with blue walls and a window seat, and Orson had a garage space converted into an area where he could fix things again on his own terms. They moved in without ceremony. No speeches, no ribbon cutting. Just a quiet walk across the lawn, Wyatt dragging a wagon full of his toys and Orson carrying a box labeled Us. That evening, Sienna stood on the porch swing, barefoot again, a mug of tea in her hand. Orson joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist. You really gave us a new start, he said. No, she replied, you gave it to me. She looked out at the yard where Wyatt was chasing fireflies with a jar and a flashlight. I want to build something here, she said. Not just for us. I've been thinking about the foundation. What if we created something local, a space for single parents? Access to career training, childcare, real support, something that changes lives, not just headlines, he smiled. That sounds like something worth building. She turned to him. Would you help me run it? He blinked. Me, you know what it's like to fight for every inch. You're exactly who I need. He took her hand. Then I'm in. 2 months later, the Blake James Community Center opened on the edge of town. The ribbon-cutting ceremony featured a small crowd, families, volunteers, and a few curious reporters. Sienna spoke from the heart, no teleprompter, no rehearsed lines. She mentioned a park bench and a boy named Wyatt, and a man who taught her that love doesn't arrive in a limo, it shows up with a paper bag of groceries and a worn-out flannel jacket. Afterward, Orson walked her off the stage and kissed her in front of everyone. Not for the cameras, but because he couldn't not. Their life settled into a rhythm. Mornings with pancakes, afternoons at the community center, evenings on the porch swing with Wyatt between them and a blanket over their legs. They fought sometimes over laundry, over how many cookies Wyatt could eat before dinner, but it was the kind of fighting that ended with laughter and stolen kisses. One night, after Wyatt had fallen asleep with a sketchbook open on his chest, Sienna curled against Orson on the couch. I used to think love was something you earned, she said, or negotiated. And now I know it just shows up, and if you're lucky, you're smart enough to open the door. He kissed the top of her head. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you handed me that tissue. She fell asleep with her head on his shoulder, and he stayed there until the morning light crept in. They never looked back, because everything they needed was already in their arms.